Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm 31 years old. I recently got married to Larry, who is 9 years older than me. But before I dive into our current life, let me take you back to the day we first met and how our story began. It was at one of those elegant garden parties that our parents loved to throw. I was just 20, fresh out of high school, and Larry was 29, already making waves as the new rising star at his father's company. I remember that day vividly. He walked up to me with a glass of champagne in his hand, a confident yet approachable smile on his face. "Lily, right?" he asked, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I've heard a lot about you." I blushed, not sure how to respond. "And you're Larry." "I've heard a lot about you, too," I managed to say, my voice a little shaky. He chuckled softly, a sound that sent butterflies fluttering in my stomach. "Hopefully all good things," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. We spent the rest of that evening talking, laughing, and, to my surprise, connecting in a way I hadn't expected. There was an undeniable chemistry between us. As the night wore on, our parents couldn't help but notice the connection. I didn't realize it then, but they were already imagining us as a future couple. It took several years, but their wishes eventually came true. Before we got married, Larry and I agreed to sign a prenuptial agreement. The terms were clear-cut: if either of us cheated, the other would have the right to end the marriage and walk away with $7 million. I had no intention of cheating, so I signed it without hesitation. I clearly remember the day we signed that agreement. My dad, a man who rarely spoke at length but always wore his heart on his sleeve, looked at me with concern. "Are you sure you're okay with this, Lily?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with worry. "Dad, it's fine," I reassured him, giving him a quick hug. "I trust Larry, and he trusts me. This is just a formality." Larry was there too, and he was the one who had insisted on signing the agreement. "I don't want you to feel pressured, Lily," he said, his voice slightly tense. "If you're not comfortable with this, we can discuss it more." But I shook my head and smiled at him. "Larry, I'm fine with it," I said confidently. "I trust you." He seemed relieved, his tension easing as he returned my smile. "And I trust you, Lily," he replied, his voice warm and sincere. That marked the beginning of our journey together. We got married in a grand ceremony that everyone in our circles talked about for weeks. I was filled with excitement, ready to start this new chapter of my life with Larry, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing just beyond the horizon. After the wedding, we moved into a beautiful house just outside the city. It felt like a dream come true, living with Larry, waking up next to him every morning. He was sweet, caring, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Our honeymoon was like a fairy tale. We spent 3 glorious weeks at a stunning beach resort, basking in the sun and each other's company. But when we returned home, things began to change. Larry seemed different, distant, and often lost in thought. He started coming home late from work, sometimes going straight to bed without even saying goodnight. Gradually, we began to live separate lives, sleeping in different rooms, eating at different times, and barely speaking to each other. One day, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to confront him. "Larry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since we got back from our honeymoon." He looked at me, his eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. "I've just been busy with work, Lily," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "But we hardly talk anymore," I pressed on. "We're living like strangers in our own home." He sighed deeply, running his fingers through his hair. "I know, Lily. I'm sorry. I'll try to make more time for us." But nothing changed. In fact, things only got worse. Larry started coming home even later, sometimes not until the early morning. We stopped eating together altogether, and our interactions became fleeting, almost non-existent. Doubt began to creep into my mind. Was he seeing someone else? The thought made me feel sick, but I couldn't ignore the signs. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront him again. One night, when he came home late, I asked him outright, "Larry, are you seeing someone else?" He looked genuinely shocked by my question. "What? No, Lily. I would never do that to you." "Then why are you always out?" "You never spend time with me," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I told you, it's just work," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm not cheating on you, Lily." But despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Larry wasn't the same man I had married. He was distant, cold, and it felt like he was hiding something from me. Unsure of what to do, I decided to investigate on my own. If Larry wasn't going to tell me what was happening, I needed to find out for myself. I started by checking his phone when he was in the shower. I felt guilty for invading his privacy, but I was desperate for answers. I didn't find any suspicious messages or calls, but what I did find made my heart sink. Larry had been searching for apartments. Was he planning to leave me? I confronted him about it. Larry, why are you looking for apartments? Are you planning on leaving me? He looked taken aback. No, Lily. I was just looking. I wasn't planning on leaving you. Then why were you looking? I asked, my voice trembling with fear and uncertainty. I don't know, Lily, he whispered, barely audible. I just need some space. Feeling lost and confused, I decided to talk to my mom about everything. She has always been my rock, the person I turn to when life gets tough. Mom, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, I don't know what to do. Larry has changed. He's not the same person anymore. My mom listened carefully, concern etched on her face. Lily, she said gently, you're both still adjusting. You're newlyweds. It takes time to build a life together. I wanted to believe her, to think that this was just a rough patch that we would get through together. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. Larry was hiding something, and I could feel it in my bones. I tried to push the feeling away, tried to convince myself that my mom was right, but the nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't go away, constantly reminding me that something was off. 3 weeks later, after endless nights of worry, I finally mustered up the courage to approach Larry again. I need a job, I said, looking him in the eyes. Larry's eyes widened in surprise when I mentioned I wanted to work. Raising an eyebrow, he asked, you want to work? I nodded, determination in my gaze. I need to do something, Larry. I can't just sit at home all day. He mulled over my words for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he offered, I could give you a job at my foundation. We help kids who are going through tough times. Would that interest you? His proposal caught me off guard. Larry's foundation was renowned for its dedication to supporting children in need, a cause I had always admired from afar. Without a second thought, I responded, yes, I'd love to. Working at the foundation was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in ages, I felt a sense of purpose. The work was fulfilling, allowing me to immerse myself in something meaningful. Every day, I interacted with kids who had endured more hardship than any child should ever have to face. Their resilience was both heartbreaking and inspiring, filling me with a sense of admiration and sorrow. The job kept me busy and provided a much-needed distraction from the problems brewing at home. My relationship with Larry had been on shaky ground, and this new role allowed me to focus on something other than the tension between us. The work was demanding, often leaving me emotionally drained, but it was worth it. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was making a real difference in the world, and that feeling brought me a semblance of happiness. However, despite my newfound sense of fulfillment, an unsettling feeling lingered. Larry had been acting strangely, distant and secretive, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that something was amiss. The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I became increasingly determined to uncover the truth. With a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, I decided to take action. I hired a private detective, convinced that Larry might be cheating on me. It wasn't just about my pride, it was about my peace of mind. I couldn't continue living in constant doubt, wondering what had gone wrong between us. There was also the prenup to consider. If Larry was unfaithful, it would be more than just a betrayal, it could have significant financial consequences. I found a detective agency in the city run by a man named Tyler, an ex-cop with years of experience. Tyler was the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat things, he had a no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. I shared my story with him, laying out my suspicions. He listened intently, his face expressionless as he absorbed the details. I'll do my best, Lily, he said when I finished, but I can't promise anything. If your husband is cheating, he's doing a good job of hiding it. I nodded, understanding the uncertainty. I just need to know, Tyler. One way or another, I need to know. I vividly remember the day Tyler came back with his report. His face was serious, his eyes filled with sympathy. I'm sorry, Lily, he said softly, but I couldn't find any evidence that your husband is cheating on you. A wave of mixed emotions washed over me, relief that Larry wasn't unfaithful, but also frustration. If he wasn't cheating, then why was he acting so strange? What was he hiding? Are you sure, Tyler? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There's nothing at all? Tyler shook his head, a look of regret on his face. I'm sorry, Lily. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I thanked him and paid for his services, watching as he left. As the door closed behind him, I felt a deep sense of loss. I was back to square one, with more questions than answers. A few days later, while I was working at a charity event, a new volunteer caught my eye. His name was John, and he was the kind of man who could light up a room with his presence. Handsome, with chiseled features and a smile that could melt even the coldest of hearts, John was everything I thought I wanted. He was smart, funny, and had a quick wit that made him easy to talk to. His charm was undeniable, and I found myself drawn to him. But as perfect as he seemed, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. His arrival felt too convenient, almost as if it were orchestrated. My thoughts drifted back to Larry and our prenuptial agreement. If I were caught cheating, I would have to pay a hefty sum, $7 million. The stakes were too high to ignore. Was it possible that John was a trap set by Larry to catch me in a compromising position? Unable to quell my suspicions, I decided to hire Tyler again. I asked him to look into John's background and see if there was any connection between him and Larry. Tyler agreed to take on the case and began his investigation, meticulously digging into John's past and monitoring his activities. Meanwhile, I did my best to keep my distance from John, which wasn't easy. He was so charming, and every interaction we had made it harder for me to maintain my resolve. But I knew I couldn't afford to let my guard down, not when so much was at stake. One day, John asked me out for coffee. I hesitated, torn between my desire to get to know him better and my fear of what Tyler might uncover. "I'd love to, John," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, "but I'm really busy right now. Maybe some other time?" John seemed disappointed but didn't press the issue. "Sure, Lily," he said, his smile fading slightly. "Some other time." Guilt gnawed at me. What if I was wrong? What if John was just a genuinely nice guy, and I was letting my suspicions ruin a potential relationship? But I couldn't take that risk, not until I had all the facts. 5 days later, Tyler returned with his findings. His expression was grim, his eyes hard. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said, "but your suspicions were right. John is working for your husband." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. A flood of emotions surged through me, anger at Larry for trying to set me up, relief that I hadn't fallen for the trap, and sadness that John wasn't who I thought he was. But most of all, I felt vindicated. My instincts had been correct all along. "Thank you, Tyler," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've done a great job." As I watched him leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had narrowly avoided making a costly mistake, but in doing so, I also felt like I had lost something, the idea of the perfect man and the hope of finding love again. It was a difficult truth to accept, but I refused to let it bring me down. I was stronger than that. I was determined to move on and find happiness again. I didn't need an ideal man, I just needed someone who was real and honest. And I was going to find that person, no matter what. Instead of immediately cutting ties with John, I decided to take a different approach. I chose to play along, befriending him while ensuring that my behavior remained above board. This way, Larry would have no grounds to accuse me of anything inappropriate. The irony was that while John thought he was fooling me, he was the one being played. But I kept that to myself, maintaining the act to prevent him from running back to Larry with any premature conclusions. One day, I decided to take things up a notch. I invited John to join me for lunch, presenting it as a casual discussion about charity work. He accepted the invitation, his expression smug, clearly believing he was making some sort of progress with me. We found a quiet spot in the cafe, away from prying eyes. "So, John," I began, trying to sound as casual as possible, "how are you finding the charity work?" He shrugged, a confident glint in his eyes. "It's good. Different, but good," he replied with a nonchalant tone. I hesitated for a moment before asking, "And Larry?" I tried to keep my voice steady, masking the tension that was building up inside me. "What do you think of him?" John looked surprised by the sudden shift in topic. "Larry? He's okay, I guess." "Why?" I shrugged, feigning indifference. "Just curious. He's a bit of a mystery, isn't he?" John laughed, clearly relieved that the conversation wasn't heading in a direction that would make him uncomfortable. "Yeah, he can be hard to figure out." We continued to chat, the conversation weaving through work and life. I maintained a neutral tone, careful not to raise any suspicions. In the days that followed, I kept up the friendly act, ensuring that I never crossed the line but always remained vigilant. It was a risky game, but one I was willing to play, for now. During one of our subsequent lunch meetings, John's demeanor shifted. He looked at me with a serious expression, an intensity in his eyes that made my heart skip a beat. "You know, I've been thinking," he began, his voice hesitant. I raised an eyebrow, a cold chill running down my spine. "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "About us. About this thing between us." My heart skipped another beat. This was the moment I had been dreading, the moment where the lines would blur. Forcing a smile, I asked, "And what is it that we have, John?" He looked at me with a hopeful expression, his voice filled with sincerity. "I think we have something special." I felt a pang of guilt. John was walking right into my trap, just as I had planned. But instead of feeling triumphant, it felt wrong. I pushed down the unease, knowing I had to keep up the act. Smiling, a fake smile that barely reached my eyes, I whispered, "Yes, John, we do have something special." And with those words, the trap was set, the game fully underway. But at what cost? At home, the tension between Larry and me was as icy as ever. We rarely saw each other, and when we did, we exchanged chilly greetings before retreating to our separate corners. Most nights, he stayed at his apartment, claiming it was more convenient for his work. One Friday afternoon, I called John, my voice laced with warmth as false as the documents he carried. I invited him over to my place, allowing him to think that I was finally ready to give in to his advances. Poor guy, he couldn't have been more wrong. When John arrived at my home, he was not greeted by the seductive housewife he had been expecting. Instead, my old classmate, now a stern-faced police officer, met him at the door. The surprise on John's face was worth every ounce of effort. The officer checked John's papers, and as anticipated, they were as fake as a counterfeit bill. Now it was my turn to make my move. I offered John a choice. He could either stick with Larry and face the legal consequences of his forged documents, or he could switch sides and work for me. John's eyes darted between me and the officer, panic evident in his expression. After a moment of silence, he nodded, agreeing to my deal. Checkmate, Larry. With John now playing on my side, I knew this was just the beginning. Larry was a crafty opponent, not one to go down without a fight. In the days that followed, I kept a close watch on John. Despite his agreement, I knew I couldn't fully trust him. He was a wild card, a potential threat, but for now, a useful one. One day, I summoned John to my office. My tone was serious as I said, "We need to talk." John looked at me, a hint of unease in his eyes. "About what?" he asked cautiously. "About Larry," I replied, my voice firm. "I need to know everything, his plans, his strategies, everything." John hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Okay. I'll tell you everything." With that, I knew I had my insider, and my counterattack was ready. But this was only the beginning. The real battle was still ahead, and I had to be prepared. This wasn't just a game anymore, it was war. And in war, there are no rules, only survival. Days turned into weeks, and my anxiety grew. I wanted to confront Larry, to prove to him that I wasn't the pushover he believed me to be. Tyler, a trusted ally of mine, gave me some advice. "Push Larry," he suggested. "Make him think you've fallen into his trap." It was a gamble, but I was ready to play the game. John and I staged a photo shoot, posing in ways that could be misinterpreted as compromising, like evidence of an affair. But we were careful to keep the original photos innocent, as harmless as a school picnic. Once the photos were ready, I handed them to John. "Give these to Larry," I instructed, passing him the envelope. "Let him draw his own conclusions." John looked at me, concern evident on his face. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Once you start this, there's no going back." "I know," I replied, my voice resolute. "And I'm ready." The very next day, Larry was all smiles at dinner. He thought he had caught me, that he had the upper hand. But he didn't say a word about it. I wasn't worried, I knew it was coming, and I was ready. Meanwhile, Tyler was on the case, digging up dirt on Larry and finding all the evidence we needed. He was good at his job, and I trusted him completely. Finally, Tyler called me, his voice brimming with satisfaction. "Larry's relaxed, and he's let his guard down. I've got him, I've got all the proof, photos, videos, everything." A surge of excitement coursed through me. "Good," I said, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's bring him down." But I didn't confront Larry, not yet. I wanted him to believe he was winning. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he'd been played. So, I waited, continuing to play the part of the dutiful wife. I waited patiently, knowing Larry's move was imminent and prepared for it. The clock was ticking toward the family dinner, which I understood would be the moment of confrontation. The event was taking place at Larry's parents' opulent mansion, a sprawling estate that exuded old money. Larry was present, dutifully playing the role of the ideal son and husband. But I was aware of the truth, and soon everyone else would be too. As we reached the middle of the main course, Larry cleared his throat and stood up, a smug expression on his face. "I have something to say," he announced, directing his gaze straight at me. With a dramatic flair, he produced a set of photos showing me with a man named John and tossed them onto the table, as if he held a winning hand. "Proof," he declared triumphantly, "of my wife's infidelity." The room fell silent, and I could sense every eye on me, but I remained composed and unflinching. Calmly, I stood up and met Larry's stare. "Yes," I said steadily, "I know this man, but he's not my lover. He's an actor you hired to frame me." I then pulled out my phone and pressed play, filling the room with John's voice as he confessed to everything. Larry's confident smile faded as he listened, his eyes widening in shock. But I wasn't finished. I produced my own set of photos and videos, revealing evidence of Larry's affairs, and scattered them on the table. "What about these, Larry?" I asked coldly. "Can you explain them?" Larry, caught off guard, stammered and tried to deny the accusations, but the evidence was irrefutable. The reaction from both sets of parents was swift and severe. Larry's parents' faces hardened with anger, while my own parents, who had been silent until then, erupted in outrage. "You ungrateful brat," my father roared at Larry. "We trusted you with our daughter, and this is how you repay us." Larry's mother, in tears, sobbed, "How could you do this to us?" To her, the aftermath was decisive. Larry was swiftly divorced, and his parents, enraged by his deceit, dismissed him from their company. His reputation was shattered. As for me, I walked away with $7 million in compensation. Now, while Larry scrambles to piece his life back together, I revel in the peace and freedom from him. I won. I outsmarted Larry and played his game better than he did, and it feels right.